Hey everyone, welcome back, and way to go as you've been studying for world history all year and tuned in because the AP test is coming up. This video is going to attempt to look at Central Africa from the beginning of the course all the way to the end to help all that is swirling around in your brain the last time you touched down in the region. So hopefully you're here and we can connect the dots. As I said before in my last video, we are focusing on different regions in Africa. The last one talked about Northern and Western Africa, and this one will talk about Central Africa. Check out this College Board map to see where we're talking about. Now, we pick up the course in the year of 1200 to 1450, the era of state building and the expanding trade network. And as I said in the last video, early state building was based more on kinship ties than this large unifying empire or leaders that really had a centralized government. Central Africa, too, will be mostly decentralized, where you'll find loose association of groups that form federation. Now, the Kingdom of Congo, Congo with a K, will start forming towards the end of this period near the Congo River. This is where you'll find modern-day Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Kingdom of Congo likely began as one of those many small entities in a loose federation until they rose up and conquered some of their neighbors. Another one would be Matamba or Ndongo. Now, this will shift us to the next historical period of our course, the years of 1450 to 1750, the era of large land-based empires and the new European maritime empires. And guess who shows up? The Portuguese in 1483. They first meet with the King of Ndongo, which is in, again, modern-day Angola. And it seemed kind of friendly at first. They leave and then return 10 years later with a fleet of caravel ships to conquer the land in the name of the King of Portugal. Now, the people of Ndongo were caught off guard and tried to defend themselves, but the Portuguese had guns. And this is the part in our history course where we get to pick up one of my other favorite ladies, Anna Nzinga. She learned to read and write because of the Catholic missionaries that had first come to the region. And after the death of the king, her dad, her brother took over. Fearing that she would challenge his rule, he had his nephew, her son, killed. Some family drama. However, he wasn't very successful at resisting the Portuguese who were entering their kingdom. Eventually, she, though, will rise up and use her bilingual skills to negotiate with the Portuguese. There's this epic moment where she is with the Portuguese governor who expects her to sit at his feet while they negotiate. And she's like this total girl boss who comes on in, gives a head nod to her servant, who comes in and gets down on all fours and serves as basically her chair while they negotiate eye to eye with the Portuguese governor. That's pretty epic. She actually reached an agreement for Ndongo to remain sovereign, which means that they had the right to rule themselves. She even converts to Roman Catholicism. However, everything goes south when the next governor takes over and resumes their colonization. But by now, Anna Nzinga's brother had mysteriously died. She takes over as Queen of Ndongo. She conquers the neighboring kingdom of Matamba and continues to assert her rule over both Ndongo and Matamba. She resists against the Portuguese until she passes away at the age of 82. Now, as Portugal is guided by their mercantilist dreams, we will see the rise in large-scale slave trading operations in Luanda for these trafficked individuals to be sent over to their largest colony, Brazil. And as I've said before, initially, enslavement in Africa continued in its traditional forms, where it was mostly just the incorporation of prisoners of war. The slave trade morphed into something like we'll see in the Atlantic slave trade. And Central Africa is going to be a large exporter and trafficker of people. As we shift into the next period of our course, 1750 to 1900, we find that Europeans were just getting started on their legacy of colonization and brutal oppression. This is the era that's focused on Industrial Revolution and European imperialism. And ironically, their own revolutions that wanted to ensure rights for all people. As industry arose first in Great Britain and spread throughout Europe, these nations were seeking raw materials needed for industrialization, and their economic motives led them directly to European imperialism, but also was shaped by white man's burden and civilizing missions and social Darwinism. And as the Industrial Revolution was catching steam, European nations were seeking those raw materials. Most specifically in Central Africa, the harvesting of rubber was the resources that was extracted due to the new bicycle and automobile industries, which needed rubber tires. But who colonized this region? European powers gathered at the Berlin Conference of 1885, which is an event you need to know, and we know that Otto von Bismarck arranged the conference to settle it so that Europeans wouldn't fight with each other over land, and we know that there was not a single African at the conference. But you know who was there? Belgium's King Leopold II. Leopold had no territory other than his small state of Belgium itself, and his greedy eyes were seeking to develop an empire much like the Big Five, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch, were having with their maritime empires. King Leopold set out to get himself an empire, and he was the ultimate con man, as he sold himself basically as this great humanitarian and abolitionist. He claimed huge territory in Central Africa, and he called it the Congo Free State, declaring that he would allow free trade, but also eliminate slavery there. But in reality, he was absolutely the opposite. First, the raw materials was focusing on ivory, but once they really discovered rubber, Leopold struck gold. He utilized forced labor in such large amounts that made him epically financially successful, as he built the Congo Free State into his personal colony. Leopold had a private army, the Force Publique, there's the French again, and they would march into villages and hold women hostage and force the men to go into the rainforest and gather a monthly quota of wild rubber. And as the price of rubber soared, the quotas also increased. He was responsible for widespread atrocities committed under his rule against the colonial subjects. One of the most notorious and absolutely grotesque practices was the way they required soldiers in the Force Publique to not waste bullets. They had to prove they did not waste bullets by bringing back the severed hand of any rebel they killed. Baskets of severed hands were very common under their expeditions. And if a soldier fired at someone and missed, it was common practice to find someone to cut off their hand of a living victim to be able to show to their officer that they did not waste their bullet. All kinds of awful here. The Congolese resisted like every other African people group did. However, their advanced weaponry caused many to flee into the jungle to survive. His crimes were eventually brought to light, and he was seen for the con man he was because of this collaboration between missionaries who reported the atrocities to journalist Edmund Morel. The Congo Free State then switched from a personal colony of King Leopold to the Belgian state, still colonized. And as we enter the final period of our course, 1900 to present, we will see the impact of the World Wars, the rise of Cold War tensions, and decolonization. As we talked about before, colonized people fought in both of the world wars on the sides of their colonizing nations. The Force Publique fought in many colonial skirmishes, specifically against the German colonial advancements in Africa. During World War II, Belgium will surrender to the Nazis, but Congo will continue to fight on the side of the Allies. Congolese troops of the Force Publique will fight alongside British forces in the East African Campaign. They will continue to supply resources like rubber and copper. Now, I've said it before, Africa is resource rich, and they found a new resource, uranium. Yep. 1944, the Belgian government reached an agreement with the United Kingdom and the United States whereby they would only sell Congolese uranium to those two countries. In fact, uranium from the Congo was used in the Manhattan Project as the United States developed their atomic bombs, which would end World War II in the Pacific. So when World War II ended, we know the next major historical development was the rise of Cold War tensions and the decolonization movement, which in light of all I just shared makes a whole lot of sense of what happens next. Now, as we talked about in the past, some colonies negotiated their independence while others achieved it through armed struggle. And in this region, independence for Congo and Angola was not really peaceful. Short version of a much longer, much more complex story. Patrice Lumumba was elected as prime minister, but as the Independence Day neared closer, the Belgians refused to give up all the land and essentially kept a mineral-rich area for themselves. I bet you could guess what was there. Yet at the end of it all, the Belgian troops did not leave, and the area of Katanga succeeded. And then things got a little crazy. Since the United Nations forces refused to help and suppress the revolt, Lumumba appealed to the Soviet Union for planes to assist in transporting his troops to Katanga. It's like a Cold War decolonization mess. This will lead to military intervention led by the Congolese Colonel Joseph Mobutu. They arrest Patrice Lumumba, they move him to Katanga, and brutally beat him, and eventually he is killed by the Katanga firing squad under Belgian supervision. Now, did the CIA have agents in Congo who were assessing the risk of Patrice Lumumba? Yes. Was he actually a communist? Did he not want the mineral-rich Katanga area to fall into their own hands instead of foreign ones? Yeah. So did he reach out to the Soviets for support? Yes, he did. And did the mineral-rich land include uranium? Yep. So this leaves us with this question. So how much was his assassination purely led by Mobutu? Or had a more covert operation with the CIA been involved? That's a great question. Fast forward, Mobutu eventually becomes the president via a military coup, and the country is renamed Zaire. He rules for 32 years and then was overthrown in 1997. It's in that year that Zaire then was named the Democratic Republic of Congo. Angola achieved their independence also through armed resistance. Remember back to Ana Nzinga and the Portuguese? Well, this is the European state that controls the region. The Angola War of Independence began as an uprising against forced cultivation of cotton and led to an independence movement. It included guerrilla warfare with the Portuguese, and eventually the Portuguese withdrew, which led to nationalist groups fighting for power. It's again during the time of the Cold War, and the United States and Soviets seem really busy elsewhere, so I'm sure they were not involved in the slightest here. Or they were. I mean, don't they have other things they could be doing, like building nuclear weapons or racing to space or being involved in 7 million other places around the world? So they were supplying weapons to different groups. And for the love of containment, the Cold War just made everything more messy than it already was. Decolonization was hard enough without the superpowers getting involved. But here we are in Angola. Further development in both the DRC and Angola has been rough. Political instability, rebellions, extremist groups have caused over 5 million people to be internally displaced within the DRC. Plus, over 500,000 refugees live in the DRC, which have migrated to that region that are linked to other conflicts, like the Rwandan genocide. In addition to widespread violence from armed groups, many displaced people are facing major health risks. Since August of 2018, the DRC has been battling the worst Ebola outbreak ever recorded in the country. The World Health Organization did learn from the outbreak in West Africa in 2016 and applied much of their research to how to effectively respond quickly and effectively in the DRC. And as we've repeatedly seen, poverty-related diseases like malaria and TB are still devastating the people in the country. Heartbreaking in how these are diseases that are absolutely curable if you have the resources. So there you have it, an overview of Central Africa from the beginning of the course all the way to the end. So let's, before we leave, do the 1-minute recap to solidify all of that knowledge running around in your brain. Early civilizations in Africa centered around kinship ties. The first kingdoms we discussed were Ndongo, Matamba, and Congo. The area of Central Africa had some loose federations. However, then the Portuguese arrived and they were looking for gold. King of Ndongo brushes them off, but they return 10 years later and try to conquer Ndongo. Ana Nzinga takes the lead and tries to negotiate with the Portuguese. Eye to eye, sitting on the back of her servant. They negotiate peace until a new Portuguese governor retracts that agreement. Plus, the Portuguese have guns. There's a significant trafficking of Africans from Central Africa across the Atlantic, mostly to Brazil, because Portugal. But then the Industrial Revolution catches steam. Europeans want resources. King Leopold II has a tiny colony. He wants a colony like the Big Five maritime emperors have. So he negotiates at the Berlin Conference and gets a huge portion of land in Africa known as the Congo Free State. He's a con man, but acted like a humanitarian. But in reality, he could be placed up there on the list with Hitler and Stalin for their brutal oppression of the Congolese people. World wars happen and colonized people fight for their mother country. However, at the end of the wars, they push for decolonization. Angola fights for independence against the Portuguese. Congo also fights for independence, and it gets really messy. Add in the layers of the Cold War tensions and that Congo has uranium. Patrice Lumumba is elected democratically as prime minister, but gets overthrown in a coup. The CIA is also around amidst these events. The person who overthrows Lumumba eventually takes control of the Congo and calls it Zaire. He rules for 32 years and is overthrown as well. Things are looking better-ish, but there's still a lot of issues that are impacting the DRC still today. Ebola, TB, malaria, all devastating. Add in COVID and different rebel groups, and it's still a rough state right now. What's next? Only time will tell. I hope that helped connect the dots legit and helped you understand more about Central Africa today. We have a sizable Congolese population here where I live who have fled the unrest in the DRC and resettled in our area of Wisconsin. The stories are horrific and what people have endured is unreal, and I know they just wish that they could go home. As always, it provides so much context to learn about the past so we can understand history today. And this story right now is in my neighborhood in Wisconsin. My hope that together we can all continue to write a better tomorrow. Till next time, keep studying, stay connected, and keep writing a better tomorrow.